The airport was buzzing with tired voices, rolling suitcases, and the metallic announcement echoing across terminals. Yet in the middle of that noise, Emma's hands trembled as she clutched her crumpled boarding pass. She hadn't traveled in years, not since life had stripped her of the luxury to fly. But this trip wasn't for leisure, it was for survival. If she didn't make it to New York by morning, the job interview she'd begged for would vanish, and with it, the only chance to rebuild her life. The boarding gate was already closing. Heart racing, she hurried down the jet bridge, slipped into the cabin, and scanned the numbers on her ticket, 17A. Breathless, she shoved her frayed backpack overhead and slid into the window seat, relieved, at last, to catch her breath. "Excuse me." A voice cut sharply through her relief. Emma looked up, startled. The man standing beside her was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored navy suit that seemed to belong more in a boardroom than on a cramped economy flight. His eyes, cool and piercing, narrowed as he glanced at his own ticket. "You in my seat," he said flatly. Emma's cheeks burned. She fumbled for her ticket, but the ink had smudged from the rain earlier, and her hand shook too much to hold it steady. I thought this was 17A, she whispered, her voice almost swallowed by the chatter around them. The man studied her, irritation flashing in his eyes before giving way to something softer. Curiosity, perhaps, or disbelief. He leaned down slightly. "This is 17C. You're 2 seats over." Mortified, Emma scrambled to move, but the aisle was clogged with passengers behind him, impatient and muttering. The flight attendant hurried forward, urging them to sit so the plane could depart. The stranger sighed, slid into the seat beside her, and shook his head. Emma kept her gaze fixed on the window, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She couldn't have imagined a wise start, an embarrassing mistake, an expensive flight she could barely afford, and now the disdain of a man who seemed untouchable. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have guessed, was that this man was no ordinary traveler. He was a CEO, one of the youngest and most sought after in the country, escaping his own storm of burdens. And as the plane lifted into the sky, his glance lingered on her trembling hands. For the first time in months, something flickered in his eyes, recognition. And with that silent spark, Emma's life was about to change in ways she could never have foreseen. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them. Emma kept her eyes fixed on the window, tracing the faint outlines of clouds against the fading sunset, wishing the ground would swallow her whole. The stranger beside her hadn't spoken since he sat down, but she could feel the weight of his presence, calm, composed, like a shadow carved in steel. Her backpack pressed against her feet, worn at the edges, the zipper stubborn from years of use. Inside were her last few belongings, a printed resume, a cheap pair of heels, and an envelope with a single bus ticket back home, if things didn't work out in New York. The reminder of a fragile reality only deepened the knot in her chest. First time flying. The stranger's voice was low, almost reluctant. Emma startled, turning slightly. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze lingered on her trembling hands still clutching the boarding pass. "Not exactly," she managed. "It's been a while." His brows drew together, curiosity flickering across his otherwise guarded features. He looked like someone used to answers being offered freely, used to people trying to impress him. Emma gave none of that, just a quiet honesty wrapped in exhaustion. The silence stretched again until the flight attendant stopped beside them. "Would you both like something to drink?" Emma hesitated, then shook her head. She couldn't afford it. Water would be enough. But the man beside her didn't hesitate. "2 sparkling waters," he said firmly, before she could protest. When the bottles arrived, Emma whispered, "You didn't have to." "I know," he cut in smoothly, twisting the cap and handing it to her. "But you look like you needed it." The kindness was so simple, so unexpected, it stung. She nodded, murmured thanks, and sipped quietly, the cool water grounding her. But she couldn't shake the unease. Why was he paying attention at all? Men in suits didn't notice women like her, not unless they wanted something. She closed her eyes, leaning back, hoping for rest. Instead, her thoughts wandered. Tomorrow's interview, the dream of finally having stability, her mother's voice reminding her to be brave. She almost forgot he was beside her until his phone buzzed. She caught a glimpse of the screen as he swiped it open. Dozens of unread messages, names she didn't recognize, urgent words like merger, press release, board meeting. His jaw tightened as he read, and for the first time she saw a crack in his controlled demeanor. Whoever he was, his world was far removed from hers. But then, unexpectedly, he slipped the phone into his pocket and turned to her. "Why New York?" Emma's lips parted. No one had asked her that, not even the few friends she still had. She could have lied, but something about his gaze, steady and searching, made it impossible. "There's an interview," she said softly. "If I don't get it, I don't know what comes next." His eyes lingered on her, and for a brief second, something like understanding flickered there. But before she could read it, the plane jolted with turbulence. The overhead lights flickered, passengers gasped, and a child cried somewhere in the back. Emma clutched the armrest, eyes wide. Without thinking, his hand brushed hers, steady, grounding, firm. "It's fine," he murmured, leaning close. "Just a bump." Her breath caught. She wanted to pull away, to retreat into the safety of distance, but his hand was warm, anchoring her through the shaking. The moment passed quickly, the plane leveling out, yet neither of them moved. Emma's pulse raced, not from fear, but from the strange comfort of being noticed, being steadied by someone who owed her nothing. Then his phone buzzed again, dragging reality back into the space between them. He answered this time, his voice sharp, commanding. She caught fragments, deal falling through, media storm. "They can't pin this on me." His words carried weight, authority. When he hung up, Emma couldn't help herself. "You sound important." He chuckled bitterly, a sound laced with weariness. Important, maybe, but not free. Their eyes met, and in that quiet admission, she sensed a truth he rarely shared. Power, wealth, influence, it hadn't given him peace. And as the night deepened, with only the hum of engines and the occasional whisper of other passengers, the unlikeliest of connections began to take root between a struggling dreamer and a man who had everything yet nothing at all. What neither of them realized was that this accidental seating arrangement was no accident at all. It was the beginning of a story that would test both of their hearts. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane crossed into the night sky, casting everything in a hushed glow. Emma rested her forehead lightly against the cool window, telling herself not to read too much into the kindness of a stranger. People didn't just appear in your life to change it. She knew that much from years of disappointment. Yet every so often, her gaze drifted toward the man beside her. He sat perfectly straight, his suit jacket unwrinkled despite hours of travel, his jaw set with a discipline that spoke of years in command. But his hands, she noticed, tightened into fists every time his phone buzzed again, lighting up with a new wave of urgent demands. He ignored most of them now, staring instead at the darkness outside. Finally, curiosity gnawed through her restraint. "You never told me your name." He turned his head slowly, as though weighing whether to answer. Then, with a small sigh, he said, "Ethan." The name landed in her chest like a stone. Ethan. It sounded familiar, though she couldn't place why. "Emma," she said quietly, almost embarrassed by how plain her name sounded beside his. For a long stretch, neither spoke. Then Ethan leaned closer, voice low so only she could hear. "You said you had an interview in New York. What kind of work?" Emma hesitated. She hated this part, explaining her scattered jobs, her patchwork of survival. "Marketing," she said finally. "At least, I'm hoping to. I used to study it, before life got in the way." "Life," Ethan repeated, almost like a foreign word. His gaze lingered on her as if he saw more than she revealed. But before Emma could ask what he meant, a murmur spread through the cabin. 2 rows ahead, a man had turned in his seat, eyes narrowing as they landed on Ethan. He whispered something to his companion, and suddenly, phones were out, screens glowing, subtle clicks of photos being taken. Emma frowned, confused. Why were they staring at him? Ethan noticed too. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He lowered his gaze, but the whispers grew louder. That's him, isn't it? Ethan Cole, the CEO who's all over the news right now. Emma's stomach dropped. She'd heard the name before. Ethan Cole, the ruthless billionaire at the center of a scandal, accused of walking away from a deal that had cost hundreds of workers their jobs. Her heart hammered in her chest as the pieces fit together. She turned to him, searching his face. He didn't deny it. Instead, he whispered, "Now you know." Emma recoiled slightly, torn between shock and disbelief. This wasn't just some stranger in a suit. This was a man the world both envied and despised. The whispers spread further. A passenger muttered loudly enough for Emma to hear. "Unbelievable. First class empty, and he sits back here among us like nothing happened." Another sneered, probably hiding from the cameras. Ethan's gaze stayed fixed forward, his posture rigid, but Emma could feel the tension radiating off him. He was used to this, being judged, being watched. Yet for the first time, she realized how lonely it must be, carrying the weight of every eye. She swallowed hard. Part of her wanted to distance herself immediately. If people thought she was with him, it could ruin her too. Her interview, her reputation, her fragile chance at rebuilding. She shifted slightly in her seat, her body betraying her conflict. Ethan noticed. His voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the murmurs. "You don't have to stay." The words pierced her. He thought she was just like the others, ready to turn away the moment his name carried weight. Maybe she was. Maybe she had to be, for her own survival. But before she could respond, the turbulence returned, violent this time. The plane shook, lights flickered, overhead bins rattled. Gasps and prayers filled the cabin. Instinctively, Emma grabbed Ethan's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. His hand covered hers instantly, steady and firm, grounding her in the chaos. The turbulence passed, leaving silence in its wake. Passengers exhaled, muttered reassurances. Emma's heart pounded, her fingers still tangled with his. Slowly, she tried to pull away, but Ethan didn't let go right away. His grip lingered, almost as if he needed the contact more than she did. Their eyes met. For the first time, she saw something raw in his expression. Not the mask of a CEO, not the armor of wealth, but the vulnerability of a man stripped bare. And in that silent exchange, a question hung heavy between them. Would she choose distance and safety, or stay beside him in the storm of his world? The plane had quieted again, but Emma's heart had not. She sat rigid, her hand still tingling where Ethan's had covered it. The passengers ahead eventually lost interest, their whispers fading into tired sighs and flickering screens. Yet the air between Emma and Ethan remained taut, alive with unspoken words. Emma stole a glance at him. His eyes were fixed on the seat back ahead, but his grip on the armrest betrayed something else. Restraint, maybe even pain. For a man who could command entire boardrooms, he suddenly seemed so human. "You don't have to explain," she said softly, surprising herself. Ethan's head turned, his sharp gaze locking on hers. "Explain what?" "All of it. The whispers, the stories. I don't need to know." A bitter laugh escaped him, low and unsteady. Most people want nothing but to know. They read headlines, skim articles, and think they've uncovered the truth. They don't care about explanations. They just want someone to blame. Emma hesitated. Her instinct screamed to stay guarded, but something inside her leaned closer. "Then tell me anyway. Not because I want gossip, but because maybe you need someone to listen." The words hung between them like a fragile offering. For a long moment, Ethan didn't answer. But then, almost against his own will, he sighed and let his shoulders relax, as though laying down armor he'd carried too long. "I didn't walk away from that deal," he began quietly. "I tried to save it. My partners, they saw numbers, profits. I saw families. I begged them to restructure, to protect jobs. They refused. And when I wouldn't sign my name to their decision, they made sure the world thought it was my fault." Emma's breath caught. The tabloids hadn't said that. They'd painted him as cold, ruthless, untouchable. But here he was, his voice thick with something dangerously close to regret. Why tell me this? She whispered. Because, he said, his eyes steady now, you don't look at me like the others do. You don't look at me like I'm a headline. Emma's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him she understood, that she knew what it was to be misunderstood, judged, dismissed. But before she could, the flight attendant returned, rolling a cart quietly down the aisle. Dinner service, she murmured. Tiny trays were passed out, plastic cutlery clattering. Emma's stomach twisted. She hadn't eaten since morning, but even the airline's lukewarm pasta looked like more than she could afford. Ethan accepted both trays before Emma could protest. He slid one toward her with a quiet firmness that dared no refusal. I can't, she began, but he cut her off with a single look. Not commanding, not pitying, just resolute. And so, they ate together in silence. The food wasn't good, but Emma had never felt such warmth in sharing a meal. Every small motion, the clink of forks, the brush of hands as they reached for the same packet of butter, wove an intimacy between them neither had expected. At one point, Emma laughed softly when her fork slipped, sending a piece of pasta tumbling onto her napkin. It was such a small, clumsy thing, but Ethan's lips curved into the faintest smile at the sound. For the first time, his features softened, his eyes lighter. You should laugh more, he said quietly, almost to himself. Emma froze, unsure how to respond. But her daughter's voice echoed in her memory. Mommy, don't forget to smile, even when it's hard. The thought stung, and her smile faltered. Ethan noticed instantly. What is it? She shook her head quickly. Nothing. Just life again. But the truth was heavier. She hadn't told him about her daughter yet, the little girl she was fighting for, the reason she was even on this flight. And the secret weighed on her now, pressing against the fragile connection they were building. The cabin lights dimmed further as night deepened. Around them, passengers settled, blankets drawn, screens flickering off. In the hush, Ethan leaned back, his voice almost a whisper. Do you ever think about starting over? He asked. Emma swallowed, staring at the shadows on his face. Every day. Their eyes met again, steady and searching. And for a brief, dangerous moment, the world outside their row seemed to fall away. Emma felt it then, the possibility of something more. A tenderness born not of circumstance, but of shared brokenness, of two people who had every reason to guard their hearts yet found them reaching anyway. But still, uncertainty loomed. She had secrets he didn't know, and he carried battles she could barely imagine. Whatever spark flickered between them, it was fragile. And as the engines hummed steadily in the darkness, Emma couldn't help but wonder, could this fragile thread between them survive once the plane touched down? The first blush of dawn crept through the cabin windows, painting everything in muted gold. Emma stared, realizing she had drifted off. Her head had tilted slightly, resting near Ethan's shoulder, though she sat up quickly, embarrassed. He didn't tease her. Instead, he murmured, "We're almost there." His voice carried a weariness she hadn't noticed before, but also a gentleness that softened his sharp edges. Emma blinked at the light, heart pounding as reality settled over her again. New York. The interview. The chance she'd staked everything on. But beside her sat Ethan Cole, the man half the cabin now whispered about, the man who had quietly shared water, warmth, and truth in the span of a single flight. She pressed her palms together, her secret gnawing at her chest. If she didn't tell him now, when would she? There's something I should say, Emma began, her voice shaking. Ethan's gaze turned toward her instantly, steady, patient. I'm not just going for myself, she whispered. I have a daughter. She's 6. Her name's Lily. This interview, it's not about me chasing dreams. It's about me giving her a life I couldn't. The confession spilled out like a dam breaking. Emma braced for judgment, for dismissal, for the look she'd seen on so many faces before, the one that said you a burden. But Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he studied her with something close to reverence, his voice quiet but firm. You've been carrying this alone. Tears burned her eyes. I didn't want pity. You don't have it, he said simply. You have my respect. The plane descended, engines roaring, the skyline of New York sprawling into view. Emma's chest ached with uncertainty. Once they landed, this fragile connection would dissolve into the chaos of the city. He would return to his world of boardrooms and scandals, and she to her desperate fight for survival. The wheels hit the runway with a jolt. Passengers stirred, collecting bags, shuffling impatiently. Emma reached for her backpack, determined not to linger, not to expect anything more. But as they stood in the aisle, Ethan's voice stopped her. "Emma." She turned, surprised. "Where's your interview?" "Midtown, Bennett and Hart Marketing." His lips curved slightly. "Then you should go. And you should know. Bennett sits on my board." Emma's breath caught. "What?" "If you deserve the job," he continued, his tone careful, "you'll get it. I won't interfere. But if they can't see your worth, they don't deserve you." Her pulse raced. He wasn't offering shortcuts. He was offering faith. And in that moment, it meant more than anything. They walked off the plane together. Though once inside the terminal, the crowd surged between them. Cameras flashed as people recognized Ethan, reporters shouting questions. Security moved in, shielding him. Emma stood back, clutching her backpack, her heart twisting. Of course, this was his world, not hers. She turned to leave, slipping into the river of travelers. But then, his voice, calling above the noise. "Emma." She froze. Ethan broke from his security detail, ignoring the cameras, his eyes searching until they found hers. And there, in the chaos of the terminal, he reached her, his hand brushing hers again as though anchoring them both. "You don't vanish on me," he said quietly, urgently. Her throat tightened. "I don't belong in your world." He shook his head. "Maybe you're the only part of it that makes sense." For a moment, the crowd and cameras blurred away. There was only the warmth of his hand, the steadiness in his eyes, and the truth neither could deny. He didn't promise forever, and she didn't ask. But in that single moment, as dawn spilled across the glass walls of the terminal, Emma knew her life had changed. Weeks later, Emma sat in a modest but sunlit apartment in New York. Lily's laughter rang through the small kitchen as she colored at the table, her tiny feet swinging. On the counter lay a letter of offer from Bennett and Hart. She had gotten the job. Her phone buzzed with a single message. "Dinner tonight? Lily too." Signed simply, E. Emma smiled, tucking the phone against her heart. She glanced at her daughter, at the bright window filled with city light, and thought of the stranger on the plane who wasn't a stranger anymore. Years from now, she would tell Lily the story of the day she sat in the wrong seat, and how it turned out to be the right one after all. The final shot would be this: a little girl's laughter spilling into the evening light, a mother's quiet smile, and a man waiting at the door with eyes no longer heavy, but hopeful. Because sometimes, the wrong seat leads you exactly where you're meant to be.